The air was thin, sharp against his lungs, and Che Guevara felt it scrape through him like a blade. Bolivia's mountains loomed with a quiet menace, gray peaks clawing at the clouds, casting shadows that seemed almost alive. Every step on the rugged path made his boots scream against loose stones, echoing the chaos in his mind. He had expected difficulty, but the wilderness was worse than any battle he had fought in Cuba or Congo. Here, the enemy was everywhere and nowhere. He moved slowly, the machete in his hand more a reassurance than a weapon. Sweat ran down his brow, despite the chill of the high-altitude dawn. He hated the weakness in his own body, hated the small betrayals of flesh when the mind demanded perfection. His idealistic self, the Che who had conquered cities with revolutionary fire, stood back silently, watching the present Che stumble. "You are not enough. You never were enough." Che stopped. The words were his own, or were they? The voice seemed foreign yet intimately familiar, the echo of doubt that had always been there, lurking behind speeches, victories, and strategies. He sat on a boulder, chest heaving, eyes scanning the distant forest. The jungle seemed alive, a shifting, breathing entity, and he imagined shadows moving, enemy soldiers in the green, ready to strike. Paranoia had always been a companion, but here it was a constant, gnawing presence. He took out his notebook, worn at the edges, pages thick with the residue of previous campaigns. The pen trembled slightly in his hand. March 3. Bolivia. The land is harsh, unforgiving. I feel it in my bones. The mountains are watching. My men trust me, but can I trust myself? The ink smeared where he pressed too hard. Frustration rose, not for the smudge, but for the inadequacy the smear represented. Every soldier he led looked to him for guidance. Every failure, every death, every hesitation would be on his shoulders. He remembered faces, comrades, rebels, those he had failed. Regret is a heavy companion, heavier than the rifles he carried, heavier than the packs loaded with supplies that never seemed enough. A sudden rustle in the underbrush made him stiffen. His hand went instinctively to the machete. A bird, perhaps, or a fox. He tried to calm his racing heart. He whispered aloud to himself, "Che, control your mind. One step at a time. One day at a time." But the whisper sounded hollow, swallowed by the vastness of the mountains. Che knew that the wilderness was not the only enemy here. The enemy existed inside him. The idealist Che, who believed in the purity of revolution, clashed daily with the pragmatic Che, the one who knew the cost of every bullet fired, every life ended. He could feel the debate simmering inside, a war within war, louder and louder. "Do you really believe this will work?" the critical Che asked. "You must have faith," the idealist Che replied, "for the revolution, for the people." Che closed his eyes, trying to silence the voices. But the forest seemed to echo them back, a mocking chorus of what-ifs and failures. He opened his eyes to the horizon, where the mountains bled into the sky. Bolivia was a place for ghosts, he thought. Ghosts of past revolutions, ghosts of mistakes, ghosts of those he could not save. And now he was here, stepping into a new chapter of blood and uncertainty. The men under his command trudged behind, quiet, exhausted, eyes shifting nervously. Che saw their weariness mirrored in his own reflection in the river that cut through the valley below. He had always imagined himself as a fearless leader, a hero in the grand narrative of revolution. But here, alone with his thoughts, he could feel the cracks forming in the mask he wore for the world. They do not see the fear. They see only Che the revolutionary, Che the invincible. If they knew. He shook his head, as if to dislodge the creeping dread. He had survived worse, yet this felt different. It was not merely the danger of bullets or betrayal. It was the slow erosion of certainty, the slow corrosion of the mind under relentless stress and isolation. The idealistic Che wanted glory. The pragmatic Che wanted survival. The man Che, he wanted peace he knew he could never have. Night fell quickly in the mountains, velvet and cold. The men made camp under sparse trees, small fires throwing flickering light on tired, dirt-smudged faces. Che sat slightly apart, staring into the flames. The shadows danced on his face like memories he could not shake. He could see the executions he had ordered, the missions gone wrong, comrades who had fallen, and civilians lost in the crossfire. His hands itched with guilt. I have killed in the name of freedom. But whose freedom? Was it mine or theirs? The diary came out again, the pen scratching against paper in the quiet night. March 3, evening. I feel the weight of every life I have taken. I cannot let this weaken me, yet I cannot silence it. It is inside me, lodged in my chest like a stone. My men sleep unaware. They trust me. I must be more than this. A sudden sound, a twig snapping nearby, made him tense. He gripped the machete. A shadow moved, fleeting, unidentifiable. Paranoia thrummed through his veins. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was everything. In this wilderness, every shadow was a threat, every whisper of wind a signal. His mind, too, was a threat. I am not safe even for myself. Che could hear the argument between his inner selves growing louder. The idealist demanded action, progress, change. The realist countered with caution, fear, survival. The soldier wanted to fight. The man wanted to rest. And in the middle, the lonely Che, torn, tired, terrified, wondered if he had finally stepped into a war he could not win. He closed the notebook, pressing it to his chest as if it could contain the storm inside him. Sleep came fitfully, dreams filled with shadows of the past and visions of a future that might never be. Bolivia waited outside, indifferent, harsh, and unrelenting. Inside, Che waited for himself, the man he had been and the man he might never be again. The mountains held their silence, vast and eternal, indifferent to ambition, fear, and guilt. And Che Guevara, revolutionary, hero, executioner, man, faced the first night of a war far more treacherous than any battlefield, the war within his own mind. The dawn came late in the mountains, gray and muted, dragging itself reluctantly across the horizon. Che awoke to the cold biting through his threadbare poncho, the shivering of his men stirring in his ears. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake the persistent ache, but it would not leave. Not here. Not now. Memories surged, unbidden, relentless. Faces from Cuba, faces from Congo. Those who had died because of him, because of the orders he had given with conviction, believing in the righteousness of the revolution. Their eyes haunted him. Some were defiant, some pleading, some blank in resignation. He could see the fear, taste the sweat, smell the gunpowder and blood as vividly as if the events were happening again. I have killed in the name of ideals, yet their screams follow me. He opened his notebook, hands shaking. The ink seemed thick today, as if the pen itself resisted writing his confessions. March 4. Bolivia. The past is alive. Every death, every command echoes in my mind. I see them in the shadows, in the trees. I hear them in the wind. The men around me do not see. They cannot. How can they? The first flashback came unbidden. A dimly lit courtyard in Havana, bodies lined in neat rows, condemned by his orders. He had watched them fall, a necessary act for the revolution. Or so he told himself. He had stood firm then, mask of resolve in place, heart ironclad. But now, years later, in the silence of these mountains, the armor had rusted. Every life taken whispered accusations he could not silence. One Che spoke quietly. It was for the greater good. Another answered, harsh and cold. Was it? Did you give them a choice, or only the illusion of one? The man Che, worn and broken, curled tighter in his poncho, wishing he could vanish into the mountains, wishing the ghosts would be merciful. He remembered a night in the Congo, when revolution had seemed so pure, so alive. Yet even then, mistakes, betrayals, and executions had carved marks on his conscience. The idealistic Che had believed in destiny, in history bending toward justice, in the inevitability of the revolutionary wave. But the pragmatic Che had witnessed the cost, the blood, the fear, the moral compromises that made victory hollow. And now in Bolivia, the balance tipped, the ghosts heavier, louder. They do not forgive. They cannot. And neither can I. A sound drew him back to the present, the men rustling, preparing breakfast, hushed murmurs of survival. He watched them mechanically, feeling a gulf of loneliness widen between himself and the men who trusted him so implicitly. They believed in his vision. They followed his orders without hesitation. But in his heart, Che wondered how much of that faith was deserved. Do they follow me because they believe, or because they have no other choice? He recalled another flashback, brief but sharp. The execution of a young soldier in Cuba, a boy barely 16, trembling as Che gave the order. The image burned itself onto his memory, the echo of a gunshot louder than any cheer for victory. That boy's eyes, wide with fear, had asked one question without words. Why? Why? The question now consumed Che. It echoed in his mind, growing louder with each passing day. His ideals, once unshakable, felt fragile under the weight of history and conscience. The idealist Che demanded justification, explanations rooted in theory, revolution, Marx, and Lenin. The realist Che demanded acknowledgement of guilt, of imperfection, of failure. And the man Che, silent and weary, knew there was no reconciliation, no absolution to be found. The mountains around him seemed to mock this internal struggle, indifferent to his torment. Nature did not care for the morality of revolutions, for the sanctity of life, or the purity of ideals. It only existed. And yet, in the vast emptiness, Che felt the haunting presence of those he had condemned. The weight of their deaths pressed on his chest, tightening with each breath. I killed for freedom. Or did I kill for glory? He wrote again, pen scratching furiously, as if the act of recording could somehow exorcise the ghosts. March 4. Evening. Each life taken echoes louder here. I see them in the firelight, feel them in the wind. Every command I gave, every execution I sanctioned, weighs like stones upon my chest. I wonder if history will call me a hero or a murderer. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. I am alone in this wilderness, surrounded by men who trust me, and yet I am haunted by those I could not save. The diary closed, but the words clung to him like a second skin. He could not escape them. He could not silence the arguments between the Che of action, the Che of conscience, and the Che of reflection. They fought constantly. The idealist demanding faith in the revolution, the realist reminding him of every death and mistake, the man Che trying desperately to survive without losing himself entirely. Night fell again, black and suffocating, and with it came another wave of memories. Faces, names, bodies, an endless procession of what-ifs and regrets. He could feel the executions in his muscles, the failures in his bones. The mountains outside became mirrors for his mind, jagged, unyielding, and merciless. Do they haunt me because I deserve it, or because I am too human to be spared? Sleep offered no refuge. Dreams merged past and present. Cuba and Bolivia overlapped. Enemies and comrades became indistinguishable. Gunshots echoed through the trees, the screams of the dead and the living intertwined. He awoke in a sweat, the notebook pressed to his chest like a talisman, the fire dying beside him. The inner war raged. One Che demands pride. One Che demands shame. One Che wishes for death as a release. Each voice was sharper than the last, sharper than any blade he had ever held in combat. The idealist Che whispered of history, of the inevitable arc of justice. The realist Che snarled of mistakes, lives lost, and consequences that could not be erased. The man Che, tired and broken, only wanted peace, but knew he would not find it, not until the final breath. And yet, he pressed forward, through the jagged terrain, through the cold and hunger, through fear and regret, he moved. Because despite the weight of every execution, every failure, every ghost, Che Guevara understood that retreat was not an option. The revolution demanded persistence, but persistence demanded courage he could barely summon. The mountains watched silently. The past whispered in the wind. And Che marched onward, haunted, weary, and conflicted, carrying with him the burden of all he had done, all he had failed to do, and all he feared he would fail yet again. The days blurred together in the mountains of Bolivia, a relentless rhythm of mud, sweat, and shadow. Che Guevara trudged through the forest with a weight on his shoulders heavier than any pack, heavier than any battle he had fought. Here, the jungle was indifferent, unfeeling, yet it pressed in on him as if alive, closing paths, rustling with whispered threats, and hiding enemies both real and imagined. Sleep had become a stranger. Even when he closed his eyes, the darkness brought no rest. Instead, it brought visions, faces of the dead from Cuba, the Congo, Bolivia, their eyes accusing, questioning, burning into him. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig made his heart leap, as though it were the first day of combat. His men noticed his silence, the twitch of his fingers around the rifle, the distant, vacant look in his eyes. But they did not understand. How could they? The war he fought was inside him, and no comrade could enter that battlefield. Che stopped by a stream, the water murky with mud, and stared at his reflection. The face staring back was gaunt, hollowed by hunger and sleepless nights. Eyes once alight with revolutionary fire now flickered with shadows of doubt and fear. He reached out, but the reflection wavered, fragmented, as though the water itself refused to recognize him. "Who am I now?" The idealist Che spoke first, voice tight with urgency. "You are the revolutionary, the man of history. You must endure. You must prevail." The realist Che countered, harsh and bitter. "You are tired. You are weak. You are not invincible. You have failed before, and you will fail again." The man Che, silent, wanted only to vanish, to melt into the forest, to escape the ceaseless arguments inside his skull. March 6, Bolivia. The men sleep. I do not. The forest is alive with movement and whispering. Sometimes I see shadows that do not exist. Sometimes I hear voices calling my name. Is it the enemy? Or is it me, calling myself to account? The line between reality and imagination began to blur. Che imagined enemy patrols circling, invisible yet inevitable. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting for a mistake. The paranoia was suffocating, each snap of a branch amplified into a gunshot. His pulse raced constantly, muscles taut, hands shaking. He lit a small fire, trying to calm his nerves, and in the flickering light, he saw them, the shadows of his past, moving between the trees. A young boy executed in Cuba, a comrade betrayed in the Congo, faces of men and women lost in his revolution. They lingered at the edge of his vision, disappearing when he looked directly, only to return when his eyes strayed. It is only fatigue, only exhaustion. No, they are here because you invited them. You ordered it. You chose this path. The diary came out again, pages fluttering in the cold wind. He wrote feverishly, ink smudging as his hand shook. March 6, evening. I do not know what is real. I hear their voices in the wind, their whispers in the leaves. I see them in the firelight. They accuse me. They ask why. I cannot answer. I can never answer. The men trust me, yet they do not know I am breaking inside. Am I even Che Guevara anymore, or only a shell of him, hollowed by guilt and fear? Night deepened, and hallucinations became indistinguishable from reality. Che saw his past executions replayed in the shadows of the trees. Gunfire erupted in his mind while the forest remained silent. He flinched at phantom screams, heart hammering, hands trembling on the rifle. Every moment became a test. Could he discern reality from the illusions born of paranoia, exhaustion, and remorse? One step forward, one step backward. One thought clear, one thought twisted. He caught sight of movement among his men, and for a terrifying instant, he believed one of them had been replaced by a spy or traitor. Adrenaline coursed through his veins. He gripped the machete tighter, eyes scanning, imagining ambushes behind every tree, in every shadow. The lines between friend and foe, past and present, right and wrong, dissolved. March 7, morning. I do not know where the fear ends and the truth begins. I see the enemy everywhere, yet he is nowhere. My men are real, the mountains are real, yet every step I take feels like walking on a blade, cutting through my own mind. I am not safe. I am not safe for myself. Sleep, when it came, was shattered by nightmares. In them, the men he had executed rose from the dead, accusing him, dragging him into endless forests. Bolivia, Cuba, Congo, all the worlds he had traversed in revolution, merged into one endless battlefield. In dreams, he was hunted not by soldiers, but by ghosts. Every misstep, every betrayal, every life lost became an indictment, unyielding and merciless. Che awoke, screaming one night, fire smoldering, the forest silent but accusatory. His men rushed to him, alarmed, but he waved them away, embarrassed and furious. How could they understand? How could they comprehend the war raging inside him? A war far crueler than any with guns or grenades. The forest is alive. The ghosts are alive. I am alive barely. As days dragged on, Che's thoughts became fragmented, diary entries more erratic, words broken, sentences unfinished. Hallucinations persisted. He saw comrades where there were none, enemies lurking behind trees, shadows flickering with faces he knew. Every moment became a test of sanity, and every action, no matter how cautious, felt inadequate. He began speaking to himself aloud, conducting full arguments with the different versions of himself. The idealist demanded courage, the realist warned of consequences, and the man Che tried to mediate, pleading for restraint and survival. The dialogue consumed him, so intense that even when others spoke to him, he barely heard them. March 8, evening. I am alone in the world and surrounded by voices. The idealist, the realist, the man I once was, they fight constantly, and I am caught in the middle. Every step I take, every breath I draw, is watched by ghosts of the past. I cannot escape them. I cannot silence them. Bolivia has become not a battleground for men, but for my mind. Even the physical exhaustion could not drown the paranoia. Che felt as though the mountains themselves were conspiring, each tree a sentinel, each shadow an enemy. Hunger gnawed at him, but more insidiously, fear gnawed at his soul. He could no longer tell whether he feared capture, death, or himself most of all. By the time he lay down for the night, fire reduced to embers, his mind was a war zone. Every thought conflicted with another, every memory an accusation, every heartbeat a countdown. He realized with a hollow pang that this internal collapse was more dangerous than any ambush, more relentless than any enemy. And yet he could not stop. He would march forward, step by step, even as the forest and the ghosts conspired to destroy him, because retreat was impossible, not for the revolution, not for his men, and not for the man who was losing himself in the mountains of Bolivia. The sun rose over the jagged mountains, pale and unforgiving, casting long shadows that crept through the forest like specters. Che Guevara trudged along a narrow path, boots sinking into mud, mind heavier than any pack he carried. Each step seemed to echo in his chest, a relentless reminder of the lives lost, the promises broken, and the ideals that now felt dangerously out of reach. He paused, leaning on his machete, eyes scanning the horizon. Bolivia was indifferent to ambition, indifferent to ideology. The revolution he had dreamed of, the one he had fought for in Cuba and Congo, seemed to dissolve here, in this wilderness, against men, nature, and perhaps himself. Is it enough to fight for ideals if the world refuses to honor them? Inside him, the argument between the Che of ideals and the Che of reality raged louder than ever. The idealist Che spoke with fervor. The revolution is eternal. Every life lost is a seed for future liberation. Every sacrifice has meaning. The realist Che spat back bitterly. No, each death is a stain, a scar, a moral debt you can never repay. You speak of liberation, but your hands are soaked in blood. How many lives must be lost before history forgives you? The man Che, worn and battered, wanted only clarity, an answer that would reconcile morality with necessity, but found none. The men behind him moved quietly, trusting, loyal, their eyes on him for guidance, unaware that their leader was at war with himself. Che envied their simplicity, their faith, but envied it with a hollow pang. He could not unsee the cost of obedience, the lives taken under the banner of revolution. Each order, once delivered with certainty, now felt like a betrayal. March 10. Bolivia. I am haunted by the question I cannot answer. Can the end justify the means? I believed in the purity of revolution. I believed that the righteous path required sacrifice. But now, faced with the suffering of innocence, the blood of comrades, and the failures of past campaigns, I am not sure what is righteous, or if righteousness exists at all. A sudden rustle in the underbrush drew him back to the present. He tensed, scanning the forest. Enemy soldiers? Or just the wind? He could no longer distinguish reality from paranoia. Every decision carried weight, not just for survival, but for morality itself. Should he advance, risking lives for ideals that might fail? Or retreat, preserving life but abandoning the revolution? If I retreat, am I a coward? If I advance, am I a murderer? Flashbacks tore through his mind. The execution of a young boy in Cuba, the betrayal of comrades in Congo, the countless civilians lost in the pursuit of ideological victory. Each memory screamed at him, demanding judgment. The idealist Che whispered of destiny, history, and inevitability. The realist Che reminded him of consequences, human cost, and moral failure. The man Che, silent, exhausted, wondered if he would ever find reconciliation. He opened his diary, the pages dog-eared, the ink smudged by sweat and rain. His pen moved furiously. March 10. Evening. I am trapped between what I believe and what I do. Each order I give feels like a compromise, a moral erosion. I tell myself it is for history, for the people, for the revolution. But do these words mask the truth? That I am just a man, flawed, haunted, incapable of absolution? I see their faces everywhere. The dead, the betrayed, the innocent. They ask questions I cannot answer. I am their judge, their executioner, their betrayer. And still I march. The forest pressed in on him, suffocating. The mountains indifferent witnesses to his torment. Each step forward was a negotiation with conscience. Each glance at his men a reminder of responsibility. They trusted him with their lives, yet he could not even trust himself. I wanted to liberate, to inspire, to create a better world. And yet I have created a battlefield within myself that cannot be won. Che's mind wandered to philosophy, to theory, to history. He recalled Marx's words, Lenin's strategies, the teachings he had studied, interpreted, and sometimes misapplied. Revolution was never clean. History was written in blood and sweat. But the abstraction, he realized, was easier to endure than the reality. Ideals demanded sacrifice. Reality demanded accountability. And he, Che Guevara, was caught between the two, frayed and bleeding at the edges. A shadow flickered on the periphery of his vision. He turned, machete raised, and saw nothing. Yet his pulse did not calm. The forest whispered, the wind carried indistinct voices, and in that sound he heard the echo of every life lost, every decision made, every failure endured. Bolivia itself seemed to demand an answer, though no answer existed. March 11. I feel the revolution slipping through my fingers. Every victory of the past feels hollow. Every death I caused or witnessed reverberates through my body like a bell tolling for a life I cannot save. I am not just fighting enemies outside, I am fighting enemies inside. And I fear that they are winning. The argument between Che's internal selves reached a fever pitch. The idealist Che demanded courage, forward momentum, faith in history. The realist Che demanded restraint, reflection, preservation of life, acknowledgement of guilt. The man Che, torn and weary, tried to mediate, tried to justify, tried to make sense of it all. But the cacophony in his mind drowned every attempt. If I fail, the revolution fails. If I succeed, at what cost? His men looked to him, waiting for instructions. He could not speak, for fear that any words would betray his uncertainty. The forest around him seemed to tighten, shadows thickening, air heavy with expectation and danger. Every movement, every breath was a negotiation between ideals and reality, between loyalty and morality, between life and death. Che closed his eyes for a brief moment. inhaling the cold mountain air. The wind carried whispers, ghosts of the past, fragments of ideology, echoes of every life that had been lost in the pursuit of a dream. He realized then that the war he fought in Bolivia was not just physical. It was moral, philosophical, and eternal. The revolution demanded decisiveness, but decisiveness demanded moral compromise. And he, Che Guevara, was embodiment of that compromise, walking the knife's edge between heroism and atrocity, between conviction and doubt. March 11. Night. The forest watches. My men sleep. I do not. I feel history pressing upon me, weighing my decisions, my morality, my very soul. I am a soldier of ideals, a prisoner of consequence, a man who cannot reconcile belief with action. And yet I march onward, because to stop is unthinkable. To stop is to surrender not only to the enemy outside, but to the chaos inside. As darkness fell, Che felt the pull of inevitability. The path forward was uncertain, dangerous, morally ambiguous. Each decision could bring death, betrayal, or worse, failure of ideals. Bolivia had become not just a battleground of bullets and blood, but of conscience, philosophy, and soul. And in that relentless tension, Che Guevara marched, carrying the burden of ideals that demanded everything and reality that demanded even more. The sun was merciless that day, though Che scarcely noticed its heat. The mountains of Bolivia pressed down on him, unyielding and indifferent, as if the world itself had conspired to crush both body and spirit. Each step on the rocky path was agony, every breath a struggle. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but the weight of his own thoughts was far more consuming. Che's boots were worn through, his clothing tattered, his hands blistered from gripping machete and rifle for days without rest. The men trudged behind, loyal yet exhausted, their silence thick with unease. They could see the change in their leader, the gauntness, the wild look in his eyes, the tremor in his voice, but they could not comprehend the storm raging inside him. March 13. Bolivia. I am breaking. My body aches with every step. My mind races endlessly. Hunger is easier to bear than the weight of guilt. The forest moves around me, alive with threats, real and imagined. I see faces in the trees, hear voices in the wind. I do not know what is real anymore. Che stumbled over a rock, catching himself just in time. For a moment, he imagined falling and never rising again, the mountains swallowing him, forgiving him, freeing him from the relentless burden inside. But even that thought brought no relief, only a fleeting temptation, quickly drowned by duty and pride. The hallucinations were relentless. Shadows twisted into figures he knew, friends, enemies, and innocents alike. A young boy he had once executed in Cuba appeared at the edge of a clearing, eyes wide with silent accusation. A comrade from the Congo crouched behind a tree, shaking his head at Che's failures. The forest seemed alive, breathing, mocking, pressing against him until the line between reality and nightmare vanished completely. One Che says, "Endure. You are the revolutionary. You are history. You must survive." Another Che says, "You are a fool. You are weak. Every life lost, every failure, every misstep, the mountain demands it all." And the man Che? He only wants sleep, only wants rest, only wants to stop being torn in pieces by every memory, every ghost, every impossible choice. The men around him murmured quietly, voices concerned. Che barely registered them, his mind caught in an endless loop of self-recrimination. Each step forward was both literal and metaphorical. The physical struggle through the jungle mirrored the internal battle consuming him. March 14. I feel my mind slipping. My body follows reluctantly, dragging me forward. I remember the faces, the boy in Cuba, the comrade in Congo, the men here in Bolivia. I cannot save them. I cannot save myself. I see enemies where there are none. Hear accusations in every rustle of leaves. I am alone, yet surrounded by ghosts. He sank to the ground by a small stream, water running cold and clear. He cupped his hands to drink, but the reflections in the water startled him. They were not his own. Faces of the past stared back, accusing, disappointed, unyielding. He recoiled, gagging, the water spilling over his hands, dripping to the rocks below. Have I been a revolutionary, or merely a man who believed himself righteous? Che's mind spiraled further. Hallucinations merged with memories. The jungle around him transformed into the streets of Havana, the villages of Congo, the urban battlegrounds of past campaigns. He could hear the gunfire, smell the smoke, feel the vibrations of distant explosions. The men around him appeared as shadows, sometimes enemy soldiers, sometimes ghosts of comrades. His own rifle seemed alien in his hands, a weight without meaning. March 15. Night. I do not sleep. I cannot sleep. I hear them all. The dead, the living, the innocent, the guilty. They speak to me, accuse me, demand judgment. I do not have answers. I do not have the strength to carry this. My body fails. My mind fails. And yet I march. Because stopping is impossible. Stopping is surrender, not to the enemy, but to the war inside me. By midday his legs trembled, threatening to buckle under the cumulative strain. Che's vision blurred, and he clutched a tree for support, panting. Each step forward became an ordeal of endurance, each breath a negotiation with pain and fatigue. The men watched silently, knowing better than to question, yet the concern in their eyes mirrored the fears Che could not voice. Every order I give feels hollow. Every movement feels like a betrayal. I am the same man who led armies, who inspired revolutions, who struck fear into enemies. And yet here I am, a frail, trembling shadow of that self. The revolution demands persistence, but persistence demands everything. And I fear I have nothing left to give. As night fell again, Che huddled beneath a sparse tree, the diary clutched to his chest. The ink on the pages was smeared from sweat, tears, and rain, yet he wrote frantically, as if recording the collapse could stave it off. March 15. Evening. The forest is alive with ghosts and shadows. My body fails. My mind fractures. The idealist and the realist fight endlessly, and the man Che cannot endure the cacophony. I am losing everything, my strength, my clarity, my sense of purpose. And yet I march forward, because there is nowhere else to go, because stopping is impossible, because history waits for no man, even one broken by the weight of his own actions. Che's collapse was not sudden. It was a slow, grinding descent into exhaustion, fear, and disorientation. He continued moving, driven by instinct and stubbornness, by the impossible duality of duty and despair. Every step became an act of defiance against the crumbling self within him, every breath a protest against the inevitability pressing in. The forest around him, once a silent observer, now seemed conspiratorial. The wind carried voices, shadows shifted, and the mountains loomed closer, threatening to engulf him. Che felt as if the entire world, past and present, reality and memory, were closing in, compressing him into a single point of tension. March 16. I feel the end approaching, not as a single moment, but as a slow convergence. My body cannot sustain this march. My mind cannot withstand these ghosts. The idealist cannot reconcile with the realist. And the man Che can only weep for everything that cannot be undone. I am collapsing, but I cannot stop. I am both alive and defeated, both soldier and casualty, both idealist and failure. In that moment, Che Guevara understood the cruel truth. The final battle was not against soldiers, spies, or terrain. The final battle was against himself, against every decision, every life taken, every failure, every ghost he carried. And in that awareness, the collapse was total. Body trembling, mind frayed, conscience screaming, yet persistence demanded movement. The mountains of Bolivia had claimed more than territory. They had claimed certainty, clarity, and control. Che marched onward, broken yet unyielding, a man caught between the relentless cruelty of the physical world and the unceasing torment of his own mind. The mountains of Bolivia were silent that morning, a deceptive stillness pressing down like the weight of inevitability. Che Guevara moved slowly, each step more labored than the last, boots caked in mud, body trembling with exhaustion. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, shadows stretching unnaturally, leaves whispering secrets only he could hear. He paused on a ridge, looking down at the valley below. The forest opened like a stage, the light catching the mist in a soft, ghostly glow. For a moment, he imagined he could see the path of his life laid out before him. Cuba, Congo, the Andes, victories and failures intertwining, victories tainted by blood, failures marked by loss. His gaze lingered on the far horizon, where ideals had once seemed eternal, and reality now pressed like a vice on his chest. March 17. Morning. The world is quiet. Too quiet. The men sleep. I do not. I feel them, the past, the ghosts, the ideals I cannot fully uphold. They converge here, now, in the final stretch. My body is frail, my mind frayed, my conscience a battlefield. And still I march. Che sank to a rock, hands shaking, and pulled out his diary one last time. The pages were soaked with sweat, mud, and rain, yet the pen moved, stubborn against the weight of despair. I wanted a revolution of the heart and mind, a world cleansed by justice, yet here I stand, broken, in a land that does not yield. My ideals demand courage, my reality demands survival, and the man Che cannot reconcile the two. Perhaps history will call me hero, perhaps villain. I do not know which I am. I only know that I am here facing the end, as I have faced every battle. With fear, with conviction, with doubt. He closed his eyes, memories flooding unbidden. The boy in Cuba, trembling before execution. The comrade betrayed in Congo. The men in Bolivia, marching and trusting, unaware of the turmoil within. Faces of the dead and living blended, accusing and pleading. He felt their weight on his chest, sharper than any machete, heavier than any rifle. One Che whispers, fight, die for the cause. Let history remember you. Another Che hisses, retreat, preserve yourself. The cost is too high. The man Che? He only wishes for peace, even if only in the end. Movement in the trees jolted him upright. Instinct, training, and paranoia sharpened his senses. He gripped his rifle, eyes scanning the brush. It was no trick of the mind. Enemy soldiers appeared, cautious, deliberate, surrounding him. The jungle had closed in. The inevitable confrontation arrived. Time seemed to slow. Every sound, every shadow, every heartbeat became magnified. Che's breaths were ragged, lungs burning, hands slick with sweat. The final battle was not abstract. It was immediate, tangible, mortal. And yet, as the soldiers advanced, he felt a strange clarity wash over him. This is the moment. The ideals and reality collide. He moved with deliberate calm, the rifle raised, mind a storm of strategy and reflection. Memories of the revolution, of comrades, of battles fought for justice, coursed through him. Each shot fired would not only be against enemies in the present, but against every doubt, every guilt, every regret that had plagued him for years. The forest erupted into chaos, gunfire snapping like jagged lightning, smoke curling into the canopy. Che felt pain, of course, bruises, cuts, bullets. But the greater pain was inside, the relentless judgment of conscience, the impossible weight of ideals unmet. Every maneuver, every defensive strike was as much about survival as atonement. March 17, midday. I do not know if this is my last entry. If it is, let it be honest. I am torn between what I believed and what I have done, between what I dreamed and what has come to pass. I am a soldier of ideals and a prisoner of reality. And now, at the end, they meet. He ducked behind a fallen tree, breath ragged, eyes scanning. The enemy closed in, disciplined and merciless. For a fleeting instant, he allowed himself to imagine escape, survival, continuation of the struggle. But the mountains, the forest, and history itself seemed to reject this hope. I see now that the revolution is not only in victory, but in every choice, every sacrifice, every moral compromise. It is not preserved in glory, but in the courage to face consequences. It is not immortal, except in memory and story. Gunfire intensified. Che's senses narrowed, the cacophony fading into singular focus. Every decision mattered. Every moment was magnified. The ideals that had once guided him whispered like a mantra, urging him to persist. Reality pressed in from all sides, cold, relentless, unavoidable. He fired, ducked, advanced, retreated. Time and space became irrelevant. The only constants were the weight of a rifle, the pulse in his veins, the ghosts in his mind. And finally, as bullets tore through the air around him, clarity settled. He understood the truth that had eluded him for years. I am neither hero nor villain. I am the embodiment of contradiction, of action and consequence, of ideals and reality intertwined. I am Che. And in this moment, all I can do is continue, as I have always done. A sudden strike, a rifle bullet, precise and unyielding, found its mark. Che felt the world tilt violently, pain ripping through his body. He fell, knees hitting the earth, breath jagged. The enemy pressed forward, but his mind, for the first time, was not in turmoil. The debate inside had resolved in its own way. The man Che surrendered to reality. The idealist Che endured in memory. And the realist Che acknowledged the inevitable. He pulled himself up, hands trembling, gaze fixed on the horizon. The mountains were silent, indifferent, eternal. His final thoughts were a mixture of defiance, regret, and understanding, a recognition of the impossibility of perfect revolution, the weight of consequence, and the unbroken persistence of human spirit. Let history decide. I have done what I could. I have fought, I have sacrificed, I have questioned, and I have endured. I am Che, and this is the end of my march. The rifle slipped from his hands. Che fell fully to the earth, the forest swallowing the sound of his breath. Shadows shifted. The wind whispered through the trees. The mountains remained, silent witnesses to the life and ideals of a man who had waged war both in the world and inside himself. And in that final, suspended moment, Che Guevara's internal war ceased, not with resolution, but with acceptance. The ideals and reality had clashed irreconcilable, yet together they had defined him, in life and in death.